elevating the discussion while talking about the things that matter most. You're listening to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Hey everyone, welcome to Society and the State. This is episode 133. Brian, alongside yours truly, talking about whether we need a social safety net. Brian, you've been a radio host for a long time, and ultimately, when we talk about proper role of government, what should government be doing, there's always this implicit notion, and we've talked about on a past episode about the social contract, but tied in with that is, well, government needs to exist, and we need taxes, and we need these programs because there has to be a social safety net. And we've encountered this from time to time. The problem that I have, I want to get your take on this as I'm kind of thinking off the cuff here, is that I feel like a lot of people equate social safety net with the welfare state. Do you sense the same, or are they talking about something else?
That's the first thing that pops into my mind when I hear the word social safety net.
So people look around us today and they see Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare and CHIP and all these different programs, and in their mind, that's what they're communicating to us by social safety net.
Well, at least for me, that's the first association that I pop up with. Now, the way you're asking the question, I'm starting to see it could probably be expanded to areas besides government, but typically I think of it in terms of, well, what government program are we going to use to address this need?
And the problem that I have, in fact, so just a few weeks ago, I was asked by someone up at the Capitol, what is kind of the libertarian solution to welfare? What would you propose? And I said, well, everyone assumes that like government ought to do this and that the social safety net, which I think every compassionate person agrees needs to exist, that the poor among us do need support, and not everyone is so fortunate to be able to afford their own care always and forever. So I've sensed that few people challenge that there ought to be a social safety net. The question is by whom and what, like how does it look and whatever. I don't know, Brian, if you've ever encountered this. I only learned of them about 3 or 4 years ago. But this modern welfare system that we have crowded out mutual aid societies almost entirely. Before the dawn of the modern welfare state, it was extremely common here in America for these mutual aid societies to exist that not only provided for health care services for their members, but created a number of other benefits for those who had joined: the camaraderie, the fraternity, the ability to have kind of a true network of support, the self-reliance principles that involved. They did business training. They would teach leadership skills. They learned self-government because they were in these kind of governance-oriented institutions. They learned the importance of good moral character. This was very much inculcated because the mutual aid society, whichever it was, all these different fraternal organizations, did not want to be on the hook for lazy people and people who were engaged in bad habits that would be expensive. And so there was kind of this built-in support network to ensure that people were living cleanly, healthy to the extent that they could, and so forth. And it was amazing because by some estimates, over 1/3 of American males were at one point, I think this is in the early 1900s, members of these lodges, these fraternal organizations. And then, of course, beyond that, people were wealthy, they could afford whatever care. But what you found is, especially among immigrants and the working class and the poor, these societies were ubiquitous. They were all over the place. You think of, you'd have these societies where people from Switzerland would come and they would have kind of their, fraternal society, and they would kind of look after one another, and all these different cultures and countries would have them. And then you had them organized based on trade and based on other commonalities. And you had people working together, banding together to provide for one another. And it was when the rise of government welfare came, it created unfair competition because, well, why would I bother with this, and why would I pay this and do all this if I can now get this for free? And over time, as government welfare increased, you crowd this out. And in my mind, that's a huge loss, because not only do you have the high taxation and the dependency and everything, but you lose that true social safety net. I would argue that the modern welfare system is not a social safety net. What are your thoughts?
It's a conscience killer. And I mean it in this sense. The way that those needs were met primarily through the voluntary efforts of community, churches, organizations that saw those needs, said, yep, that's real. We want to meet that. Shriners Hospital might be an example. People came together voluntarily, and they would, that's real charity. I mean, they had the choice of not donating their money or donating their time, but they chose to do it anyway. So that's actual charity. When the government started doing it, it was like, no, we'll just take some of your money. That you won't even miss it. We'll just slip it out of your paycheck, or else, you know, I mean, you don't really have a choice. And a lot of people, I think, switched off their conscience because, well, you know, it's being taken care of. I don't have that personal responsibility anymore. So when I see a need, I can just think, well, you know, there's a program for that. Go talk to Health and Human Services, and they'll find something for you.
Yeah,
and that's a huge difference because it's a forced charity versus a voluntary charity, and our consciences get set on the back burner.
So a conscience killer. I like that. And so, Brian, what then are your thoughts on the fact that a mutual aid society approach or something akin to it is truly social? I remember critiques of the Social Security Reserve system where it's neither social nor is it secure, nor are there any reserves, right? We use these names that don't really have any connection. And so when I think of what is true to the name of a social safety net, I think it's something that is based on true social principles. And to me, mutual aid societies, or even today, the modern equivalent, though far, 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 far less popular, is the healthcare sharing ministries that we see today, particularly in some of the minority Christian groups, the Amish and
Mennonites.
Mennonites, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And but similar principles. Let's kind of help one another together and so forth. What are your thoughts then on the welfare system not being a social safety net? Would you agree with me that it's kind of like the Social Security Reserve? It's just an indictment that it doesn't deserve that the label be applied to it?
Yeah, I think it fails the test, number one, on the grounds that it's not a voluntary system. And so to me, that takes some of the virtue out of the equation. You mentioned dependency. And that, I mean, come on, how many generations now since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society have seen, generational dependency and on the system? Now, there are alternatives that exist, but they're not nearly as well known because they're not compulsory. One of the ones that you and I might be familiar with, Deseret Industries. Mm-hmm. People think that, that's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints thrift store. But which, you can get stuff like that, but I don't think a lot of people understand some of the different services that are available there. People can get vocational training, they can get job training, counseling on how to eliminate debt, and other things like that. I mean, real life skills, and they're not charged for those things. This is provided as a service of the church, but it's still very, very helpful.
It's super interesting to me also to consider, Brian, if culture has changed, and that's part of the problem. So as I've looked into these fraternal societies a little bit, there very much was this kind of ritualistic approach to it that I wonder if, our society today is like, oh, that was back in the 1900s when they didn't have Netflix, like if, for example, I'm going to read from a Heritage article that we'll throw up on the show notes page for today, which is societyandthestate.com/133. And this says that all of these fraternal societies advocated self-reliance, which was a hallmark of fraternalism. This objective was a centerpiece of the initiation ceremony of the Independent Order of St. Luke, one of the fraternal organizations, which featured a symbolic journey to Jerusalem. To foster humility, it required that the candidate wear a torn white robe. Prior to the journey, a guide foretold what lay ahead. Quote, "You must find the road rough and rugged, and you may meet with disappointment and mistrust. You will find no friendly hand extended or kind advice given you on which to lean." And then they go on to say the meaning of the lesson was plain. This is one of the times that self-reliance must be exerted. You must seek to find the emblem of the cross with patience and unceasing energy, as it is claimed Helena possessed in searching for the cross of Calvary. Right? A lot of these were religious fraternal organizations. A lot of them weren't. But at their core, a lot of them had these kind of ritualistic approaches. They used a lot of symbolism. They had rituals that they would kind of initiate people into their order. I remember when I was a Boy Scout, I was, after I got my Eagle, I did the Order of the Arrow. And I remember thinking, and I'm like 14 or whatever, I remember thinking, this is weird, right? Because people are wearing I don't even remember at this point. One was like a wolf headdress, and other people had this get up and they went around with secret passwords and handshakes and these different things. And I just remember being like, this is kind of creepy, what are they doing? But I wonder if part of that is we've lost that as a culture, and that those were kind of an essential element in creating the true social bonds and structure to get people on the team. You know what I mean? Like, do you sense that as well?
Well, it's obviously easier to do things as a team. And especially if you have the sense that, hey, I'm not only on a team, but I'm on kind of an exclusive team. You know, you got to know the countersign in order to get into our club meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the big distinction comes down to, is it voluntary or is it compulsory?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference between the social safety net today. It's a compulsory thing that most of us have no option of leaving behind, either contributing or being a part of it. You know, they're going to take Social Security from our our tax obligations every time, just like clockwork. We don't really have an option there. But I think the truest social safety nets, in the sense that it's really addressing a need and it's being done on a voluntary basis, that's the distinguishing factor that makes it legit.
I think you raised a really good point that when it's taken out of your paycheck, when it's coercive and so forth, there's no charity there. It's coerced obligation. There's no connection to the beneficiary. You have no clue. I mean, frankly, most of your money is going to pay for lazy bureaucrats and wars across the world. But, you know, the slight portion that's used to actually help people in need, you don't see that. There's no kind of mutual positive gain where you see the impact and the person who is the beneficiary thanks you and is accountable to you. I want to read in conclusion here the last paragraph from this article about the mutual aid societies that we'll link to today. And to me, this kind of encapsulates what we've been talking about and presents the problem. We're not really here with solutions. This is a big problem, but understanding what is actually a social safety net, I think, is going to help us at least make the distinction that the modern welfare system is a problem. It's not a solution. It creates problems in trying to be a solution to a problem. And there's a better way that we've kind of veered away from that we got to figure out how to get back to. Maybe it's the Mennonites leading the way. Maybe there's other systems. Maybe there's going to be new tech apps that are going to, like peer-to-peer apps that are going to let us do this. Who knows? So this paragraph in conclusion here says, the shift from mutual aid and self-help to the welfare state was not just a simple bookkeeping transfer of service provisions from one set of institutions to another. As many of the leaders of fraternal societies had feared, much was lost in an exchange that transcended monetary calculations. The old relationships of voluntary reciprocity and autonomy have slowly given way to paternalistic dependency. Instead of mutual aid, the dominant social welfare arrangements of Americans have increasingly become characterized by impersonal bureaucracies controlled by outsiders.
Dang.
To me, none of that is social safety net. This is a bad scheme that we got to figure out how to get away from. If any of you have any ideas, I think we would love to explore this. What are the new apps? What are the new things that are trying to solve this? It'd be great to talk more about this.
One quick thought on this, too, is the mindset. You don't see a lot of humility in the current social safety net. What you see is a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
And boy, there's a world of difference between those two things.
Absolutely. Good topic. A lot to unpack, more to talk about. If you guys have thoughts, feel free to reach out to us through societyandthestate.com. This is episode 133. Stick with us next time. I have lined up where I was able to reach out to Michael Tanner. We've actually got a few authors coming up, some really fascinating books that I've been thumbing through. They're going to be great to talk about. So make sure you're subscribed, societyandthestate.com, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.